So thank you for joining us for getting the most juice out of your empathy work.
So you may be wondering, what is Juice Plus? Let me tell you. So it actually is a bevy of brands that fall underneath my purview within Juice. So they include brands like Tropicana, Naked, Kavita, Dole, Izzy. So all these really exciting brands that I have the privilege of working on day to day. Let me tell you a little bit about me. So I have been with PepsiCo 12 years, really great 12 years, working all in juice. So really excited to tell you a lot about how we've built that program up over the course of several years. Before PepsiCo, I had a really great career time at General Mills, working on some fabulous brands there. Lastly, on their kid cereal business, so really fun brands. Even before then, I had a really great research career, even at IRI and Nielsen. So I've touched on even the supplier side of things. So I've had a phenomenal career, but a lot of the time spent in food because I'm a foodie and I love food. So if you haven't seen me around, I live in Chicago. I love Chicago, born and raised in Chicago. I'm a Southsider for life. And I'm excited to talk to you guys today about the work that we're doing. And with that, I'm gonna kindly introduce my magnificent co-host, Rob Volpe.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Really excited to be here today, talk about a topic that I personally think is really important, as Isaac mentioned, in today's society, as well as in corporate America, and that's empathy. A little more about me for those that don't know me. I'm CEO and Chief Catalyst, as well as empathy activist at Ignite360. We're an insights and strategy firm. I'm based out of San Francisco, although we are virtual and spread all over the country and over in Europe. So a year ago today, when things were locking down and slowing down, we just kind of rolled right into virtual life. I've also been described as an astute observer of human behavior, as well as a master storyteller. And I'm really passionate about empathy, how to develop it, how to harness it. And I've written a book, it'll be coming out next February, called Tell Me More About That. And it's all about empathy building and how to actually get there. And I use a lot of my experiences from qualitative research to bring that to life. So today's presentation, Kelly and I are going to share some information around the empathy crisis and how that impacts the workplace. We're also going to tell you about the empathy program that she and her team at PepsiCo developed, how it was structured, the initial results, as well as recommendations, so you can be thinking about how to build your own program moving forward. And we should have a few minutes at the end for questions. We will try to keep an eye on the chat, but and catch questions as we go. But if we miss something, we'll definitely get to it at the end. So the empathy crisis, it's real, it's out there, it's been there for quite a while. And this is focused around our ability to have cognitive empathy. There's two different types of empathy: cognitive empathy and then affective, or also known as emotional empathy. And really in the workplace, in business, and in a lot of our day-to-day life, it's cognitive empathy that's what we draw on and use. And that's being able to see the perspective of others. And a study in 2010 from the University of Michigan found, they did a meta-analysis of college life surveys and asked people from 1970, I think it was 76 universities, from 1979 to 2009, and they asked, are you able to see the point of view of your classmates? And they found over time a 40% decline in the ability for people to see point of view. It particularly accelerated its decline in 2001. And we haven't seen any indication that it has picked up or strengthened back up. A lot of that, why is that happening? What's going on? Well, we've got a lot of partisanship. You know, you just turn on the news and you can see that happening, but it's also playing out in the bubbles that we've formed in our own lives. Social media, the way that the algorithms kind of keep us contained and fed information that is what we want to see more and more and more of. All of that keeps us disengaged from other people. Plus just the busy lives that everybody's been leading, you know, pre-pandemic, certainly running from place to place to place, keeps you focused on yourself rather than engaging your empathy muscles and really listening. And a post that I put on LinkedIn not too long ago, I just said, you know, we don't we don't take the time to ask each other, how are you? And to really listen to that answer. How are you has become a rhetorical question, unfortunately. And we need to actually turn that around as part of this decline in empathy. Because if you're not listening, it's one of the 5 steps that we coach. If you're not listening to somebody, really hearing what they're having to say, and that includes your consumers, as well as your colleagues, your coworkers, your family, your friends, you're not actually able to build empathy. And so this lack of empathy creates a lot of challenges in corporate America, as business teams may not be as representative of their consumers in demographics as well as behavior. So if you think about, often you're not necessarily representing who your consumer is. Therefore, you need to take some action to actually build that connection and understand who they are. And if you can't have empathy, it's really hard to do that. Empathy also helps inform decision-making across business functions. When you think about a cross-functional team working together, everybody's coming from a different point of view. And it's really important, and you use empathy for marketing to understand what R&D is, where they're coming from, or where insights is coming from, or finance, or another function. It, of course, helps build connections to your consumer and becomes key to keeping the relationships real. I loved this quote. There's some leaders that have started to recognize that empathy is really important, and it's happening up at the C-suite level. Satya Nadella at Microsoft, when he became CEO a few years ago, he started talking about the importance for the world's largest tech company to have more empathy with the consumer, with the end user, and understand what's going on. And they're playing that out. Similarly, Greg Lyons, when he became CMO of PepsiCo, and Kelly can talk more about this, but he started to champion the importance of empathy. This quote came from him this past summer as the pandemic was going on, but I think it sums up why empathy is important. Marketing is becoming more data informed, but I'm a little worried that with a performance marketing mindset, our relationship with consumers might become more transactional. And so that's what happens if you lose that empathetic connection in favor of data. You're going to have more transactional relationships, and those aren't the foundations that brands are built on. Kelly, I'm going to advance the slide. If you can share a little more about how the role of empathy has evolved in your part of the organization over the past few years.
Sure. So let me tell you guys, our challenge probably wasn't unlike any challenge you guys have been facing on some of your businesses or with some of your clients. The empathy challenge is real, right? So, a lot of the times what we've been discovering in our org is you've got folks who are working on brands, who are working on businesses that they actually have never had any interaction with, or they're not the consumer. They don't understand the consumer, or they've never been in an empathetic situation where they could draw from their experience, right? So one of the things we wanted to do, in recollection and recognition of the fact that we know we need to strengthen our marketers' sort of informal and formal gut, we wanted to invest and spend time thinking through ways and methods and tools and resources that we could unearth to help our teams get closer to the consumer, to better connect with them, to understand them at a more deeper level, so that we can unlock the power and the strength of that connection through our brands and how we engage and interact with our consumers. So Greg Lyons actually was one of our CMOs within the PepsiCo beverages division, who was really the first to really underpin the importance of it. Just thinking about the way that our marketers are driven from a performance marketing perspective, but more so to help us understand the fact that you can't unlock growth just by looking at massive big data. You got to get to the whys, what's underneath that, what are the why nots, how do we solve for some of those challenges that seem so complex but can be simplified if only we understood our consumers at a more deeper level. So in 2019, our Global Insights org took the challenge. We said, hey, we're the greatest at understanding consumers. Let's figure out how to bring this to our organization in a way that they can embrace it, that they can understand it, that they could familiarize themselves with the proper tools and techniques, but as well engage with us in a big, massive way. So we developed this human empathy program called Humanize. And one of the ways we thought about this program very deeply is understanding to which, how can we think about empathy in a way that not only builds that instinctive intuition, but as well, it gives folks an opportunity to have shared experiences so that it impacts the way that they think about consumers and how we bring consumer centricity to the table. So as we thought about it, one of the things that we wanted to initiate was real-time, more frequent touch points with consumers. So getting up out of our desk, thinking about how we would engage them in ways that were engaging and exciting, but as well give them more food for thought, more ways to challenge the status quo, more ways to push the envelope on how we go to market with our consumers and how we draw on insights that are relevant and resonant in the moment. So in 2019, we investigated a ton of tools and research methodologies. We spent time, like Kelly mentioned, just getting to the surface of what are the new sort of interesting ways and technological ways people are tapping into consumers from a not just a theory perspective, but from a real life touch and feel in context sort of a way. And we spent time leveraging some of these tools and tactics across our broader org. Now, I will say a lot of it was probably the typical things you would expect, right? More immersive, IDIs, one-on-ones, trying to get folks in a room, panels with consumers. And all of that was really, really great. But one of the challenges we had with that is while it was great to get folks one-on-one in touch with consumers, what it lacked was an ability to scale and to really tie it to true business objectives and implications. So in 2020, our team took our business to task and we said, hey, our empathy is only touching it at a very surface level. We want to go deeper. So we want to refine our program and we want to think really tactically about the better ways to make those connections stronger and to forge a better relationship with our consumers. So we thought about ways to engage, but we wanted to really take a step back and think about what are some of the things we need to have at the forefront. And I want to offer these things to you guys as ways to be thinking through how do I set up the right, let's just say, program to help unlock a stronger, more forceful empathy program. So some of the things we consider, right? It's like, how do we think about this empathy challenge as it relates to our business, right? Like if we thought about where empathy is weakest, how do we tap into that to say, what are the opportunities there? Where do we have marketers, sales folks, financiers, our R&D, our sensory teams? Where do we still feel like they are more drawn off of their intuition versus they're throwing darts at things? They're looking at data and just making a decision, not truly understanding or investigating or interrogating the whys within that. And then where do we want to take that and focus? How do we think about tying that to a real, tangible empathy objective? How do we want to marry that up even with an objective, something that they care about, something that they are excited about, something that's going to drive them to really dig in and get in touch with that empathetic side of them as well as their consumers. And how do you make that real for them? Because they're going to care about what they care about, right? But we want to make sure that the empathy is tied to that so that they can embody it in a way that maybe they haven't in the past, but also in a way that's motivating against their business objectives. And then how do we build this into really strategic, though thoughtful, guided exercises that helps them to better invest their time, but as well spend the time in a way that is very meaningful. And that gets them to really drive some of those empathetic behaviors in all the things that they do. But it also allows them to sit back and start to internalize what some of that shared learning, that shared behavior, some of the shared experiences is bringing to the table for them in terms of unlocking that pathway that maybe seemed dark or was dim because they lacked a necessary level of understanding that was pretty deep. And then once they're experiencing all of these empathy exercises and they're getting in touch with consumers and they're tapping into some of the objectives that they've been struggling to sort of unlock, how can we make sure that they understand the practicality of taking what they're getting out of this experience and applying it to their day-to-day? What are some ways to help them understand when you're in the kitchen with Jan and Jan is struggling to open your package in the morning and she's got 10 minutes to get her kids in and out the door? How do you think Jan is going to feel when we haven't optimized that packaging to make it easier or more efficient for her in the morning? How is Jan going to feel when we fail to deliver on her desires to have a more healthy morning breakfast? And we're keep giving her things that goes against what she's looking for her family. When we're giving her things that has more sugar than she's looking for, or that isn't delivering on that vitamin C benefit that has been heightened by COVID, right? Like, how do we think about ways to better satisfy her needs so that she continues to buy into our franchise, right? And how do we take that tactical learning and we say, hey, if we were thinking about innovation for our brand, if we wanted to turn vitamin C on its head, if we really wanted to engage Jan in ways that she hasn't been engaged with our brands, How do we translate that into something very meaningful for our business? How do we think about restaging some of our product line? How do we think about ways to tap into convenience for her in the morning? Do we start to give her something that's a little more helpful in the morning versus harming her in the morning? And then post that, like, how do we think about the considerations for our team, right? Everybody's busy. We're time starved, even in a COVID era where we are home, we think it's convenient and we love it, but the honest to God's truth is we're spending a lot more time working than we probably ever did in the office. So how do we think about that consideration, with our team's time, making sure that it feels like it is time well spent? And how are we thinking about the duration of our program, right? Like, they can't touch folks every day. It would just be unreasonable. But where are those magical touch points, whether it's in the business planning process or whether it is in a specific downtime of the year where folks have enough time to engage more thoroughly? How do we consider that? But as well, how do we think about budget? Like, what are some really smart, fascinating ways we can engage that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, that doesn't pinch on our already pressing brand budgets? How do we find those really smart, easy ways to engage our teams, but that also has total impact against the brand initiatives? And with that, I'll turn it over to Rob to tell us a little bit about how he structured out our very innovative creative program at Ignite.
Sure. Thanks, Kelly. So the way we approached this particular program and others that are like this, anytime that you're providing skills and teaching somebody, you need to give them an opportunity to actually learn the skill itself before they have to go apply it and practice it. So we started with Empathy Camp, and all 4 business teams that were participating in this program all started, and actually we started everybody together. So they were all on at square one. And that includes Anup Shah, who's the VP CMO of the Juice Plus brands. He had just started and he joined, which was really impressive to us. And I think to some of the team members, that he took the time to go through this experience with them. So we went through Empathy Camp. Empathy Camp is all about learning and practicing the 5 steps to empathy together and having small group conversations about it. So there's a lot of dialogue. And then you get a little bit of the practice where we had the team members individually play Lifeology, a virtual version of that because of the pandemic. But originally the plan was to do this in person. Lifeology, and that's one-on-one gameplay. There's a board, you move around, you land on categories, you ask questions. The consumer answers the question, and then you as the team member also answer the question. So you're playing on a very human one-on-one level. You're listening. As I was saying earlier about asking, how are you? You're having those types of conversations. You're hearing what people have to say. And then there's debrief and application conversation after that. That was part 1. Part 2 then really focused on, okay, what are the business questions? So we got some business questions into Lifeology, but the part 2 was really around custom activities designed to then answer the business questions. So you've given people the empathy skills, and now you're creating the situations, the experiences that they can have to go build and have more empathy and get some of their business questions answered. So we created a range of different activities. Again, it was based off of their business questions. I can't reveal what those are, obviously, but it always had some element of the team mirroring the consumers, plus video one-on-one calls to debrief with the consumer, talk about whatever it was that they did. But we did things like an inundation or share the moments related to Tropicana, or drink juice like me for Dole, or Izzy, confessions of love videos of why do people love Izzy. And then all of that, so all the teams were running through those different experiences. And then each team went through a facilitated debrief and application session, because as Kelly was saying, like, it's great to go through this stuff, but if you can't make it stick, if you can't get it into the consciousness and the work streams and the day-to-day, then it doesn't hold up in the same way. And then that's followed up with a PowerPoint report based on the team debrief. So the teams are really co-creating this as we go along. Kelly, what did we do? How did you guys keep the team engaged as we were putting you guys through the paces on this?
Yeah, so you always get a range of folks and a range of engagement on brand teams, right? But one of the things we wanted to do was really spend time with the teams, understanding what's underneath some of the attention and some of the questions that they have on the business, so we could better understand from their perspective, even like having empathy for our brand teams, even in terms of like, what are some of the challenges on the business that they're struggling to resolve, right? But with that, we also had to engage our senior leadership. So a good example of that is like getting the leadership's organizations buy-in, our senior leadership team. So we actually spent time one-on-one with each of our senior leaders, taking them on their own sort of empathy journey. So doing one-on-ones, doing store walks, taking our senior leaderships to contextual places they had never been to engage with the consumers, to show them the power of empathy, to really make sure that they understood and can internalize it for themselves, why we were so passionate and so gung-ho about ensuring that empathy traveled throughout our organization. And that was one of the really, really strong ways that we were able to get our senior leadership team to buy into exactly the principle and practices we wanted them to not only demonstrate, but to support. So I think having a support from the top definitely helps. But as well, it also helps them to be able to support us in these initiatives when we are wanting to drive this throughout our organization pretty fluidly. I think the other thing too was making sure that we could tie the rationale or the approach to a very relevant and resonant business question, right? Making sure that it is tied to the business strongly and that people understood the importance of being able to connect the dots in ways that could transform the business. I think also being cognizant of, managing people's times effectively and appropriately, right? So what are the right times to be engaging folks? When do you catch them in the moments where they're in need of it? They are reacting in ways that could help stimulate the conversation or could not be so transactional, but be motivational in a sense and could be inspiring. When do you find those moments where empathy can be really, to some degree, put in its sort of shape and form where people are readily reacting and engaging in ways that they haven't before. And then how do you demystify the process? So a lot of folks go like, what is this? Like, I don't get it. Like, you're asking me to be like really soft and squishy. That's not me. Like, I'm really hardcore type A. And then you put them in these experiences with the proper training, with the proper development skills, with the proper energy and time investment, and you allow them to just flourish, and you allow them to spend time with consumers, and you allow them to understand how they can take a moment that seems so awkward and unfamiliar and really get into it deeply. And I think people find the value in that really strongly because they're like, oh my God, I never knew the power of just a simple conversation, hearing a simple story, hearing, someone tell me about how their day went or how their day ended and all the ways that my brand showed up in that day. So I think it can be something magical if you just demystify the complexity that they sometimes see in it. And then make it fun. Like, don't make these exercises like a bore or snore. Like, no one, not even I, want to participate in anything that isn't fun or interesting or motivating or that really draws on something that I'm curious about or that I want to understand better. So really trying to not go overboard with the fun, but thinking about really smart ways to cleverly put people in context where they are open and honest and willing to listen in and dig deeply and ask some of those very interesting probing questions. And then thinking about, application of this, right? Like, like Rob mentioned, our debrief sessions were super important. They were important for a lot of reasons, but the most important reasons was to really help people translate what they just experienced into a very, let's just say, real application. How do I take what I just understood from this drinking exercise with my, Tropicana consumers and turn this into something meaningful by way of my business objective? So we spent a lot of time helping people understand a little bit about what that experience meant and how they could translate that into a real tactical sort of business exercise or even an implication. And then we really want to transfer it back to our empathy work in ways where we say, hey, remember that time when we talked about, our new brand advertising with X consumer, and they gave us that really fascinating unlock that helped us take it to the next level with our reverb? Like, or remember when you had that moment with the Izzy consumer where they did X, Y, and Z, and all of a sudden you discovered you had it all wrong, or you totally thought about it in the wrong way. It comes up constantly because they're having these more frequent touch points. They're experiencing a lot better. They're starting to get the fingertips for consumers. And it's really exciting to see how they transform. And as a result of that, right, now you've got marketers who are like not following data over a cliff. They're able to pull back and say, hey, wait a minute, I know the data says this, but my intuition or my gut says X. And that helps me to evaluate this in a different light, or it helps me to think about a different set of decision criteria I want to now own. And because of this, we've been really able to do a number of things that I think have been just significantly great for our business. It's allowed us to look at innovation through a different lens. Sometimes we've even refined concepts before we've actually tested them because of something we've learned through one of our empathy exercises. We've looked at positioning in a very different way. How we might think consumers perceive our brands could be vastly different from, what they showcase to us when we are, in their context, in their moment, when they are reacting to our brands in ways that, we should be honoring. And then it's also helped us to think about really strong sort of differentiated ways to think about our brand strategies, even like how are we actually approaching consumers? How are we leaning in on some of our brand challenges? Where are we applying our brand strengths in ways that we think could, promote or encourage even, buyer behavior in a different way? And I'll turn that over to Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Just one last slide to wrap it up. It's so rewarding and heartening to hear how the team, after, because we're a few months out of the program, but they're actually using it and they're referring back to and thinking about their consumer. So final slide with a lot of content on it. These are our top 5 recommendations for your own program. The first one, as we were talking about, is to solve your business objectives, like nest your business objectives within your empathy program. Be thinking about how those two things can work together. Take the time to build a foundation of skills so that those subsequent parts go smoothly. You've got to help people understand what it is that they're asking for. If our empathy muscles have atrophied, it's like going back to the gym and getting back into shape. It takes some time and you need to give it that time so that you can then run and you're actually doing the engagements. Make sure you keep the team engaged, but not overburdened. As Kelly was saying, it needs to be fun. It always has to be fun. And don't let a consumer interaction go to waste. Debrief it, discuss it, turn it into a report, write it up. Figure out, talk about how to apply it to the actual business. Every consumer interaction is valuable and should be treated that way. And finally, make sure that you're referring back to those consumers in subsequent meetings. Bring them to life, let them continue to live on. The stories that everybody tells, the sticky language, make sure that you infuse that into your organization and into your culture. Thank you, guys. If there's any questions, please let us know. I know there's one, if I can answer it super fast. Any cultural difference, country differences in empathy crisis and decline? The study that we looked at focused on the United States. I've seen other studies that do indicate there is an empathy decline kind of globally, but it does vary based on market and region and development of that particular country.
Kelly, Rob, fantastic job. I think you can tell from the chat window, this is obviously a topic that people would want to listen to for a lot longer period of time. So thank you for spending time with us. We have just a minute here. If I could get a quick question in for probably Kelly. This was a new program for you, right? And there's a little bit of trial and error whenever you do anything for the first time. Is there one thing that Kelli Davis wishes she could go back and do a little different or would have done differently that might be a learning for everybody who's out there listening about incorporating something like this into their own brand?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually. I think one of the things that, and even Rob and I have been talking about it in terms of planning for next year, is to try to think of, even if we're in still the COVID phase, right? How do we think about some of the more fun or interesting things like what Kelly just before me acknowledged in terms of like technical unlocks or really interesting technological advancements that can even help us further along some of the activities or to make them even more compelling or interesting. That, I think that obviously opens up a new floodgate, right? Because you get people who say, oh my gosh, I've never done this before. I absolutely have to be a part of this. Or you gain a newfound perspective around ways to challenge the proverbial thinking on how you engage with the consumer, right? Like who would have ever thought about replica, right? As a way to engage with the consumer. But that could be a really smart, new and interesting way of creating more engagement, more enthusiasm, more commitment even to empathy. So that's some of the things that I think, looking back, I wish we had been a little bit more forward thinking in terms of like what's to come, what's next. But I think just some of the inspiration, even from Kelli and from Rob, I'm feeling good about the world that's evolving ahead of us and how we're going to get in front of that for 21 and 22 planning.
Awesome. Well, hey, Kelli, Rob, thank you so much. You can see from the question pod, there's a ton of support for what you're doing and people have a lot of interest in it. So fantastic job.